Welcome back. You're watching KTN News Desk. It's a pleasure to have you here. Let's remain with the intrigues of the 3 trillion budget with some highlights of the Kadogo economy, which has for a very long time defined Kenya's low income.
In the 2018-2019 fiscal year, a promise it made to Kenyans in 2013 and one that has seen minimal, if any, success for the last 5 years. To the contrary, there has been a constant and steady increase in the rate of unemployment among Kenyans.
Tuamtaa kama sisi, hatuna kazi wengi wao, kuna single mothers, kuna watu wajiwezi. Sasa the more wanapandisha budget, tunataka tuishiaje kwa hii Kenya.
In smaller quantities, here in Korogosho, from soap that goes for at least 10 shillings to chicken products like feet, gizzards and necks that also go for at least 10 shillings each. Locals like Consolata Awor, who has 6 children, are struggling to survive with a constrained economy.
Watu wanakula sana juu hii orenge ndio ina bei rahisi. Hatuwezi kufikia kukula kuku yenyewe. Sasa sisi tunafika tu kukula hii juu ya shida. Juu mimi pia nilifikiria niuze hii, nilikuwa ninaishi hapa Korokocho, nikaona ukileta kuku yenyewe hakuna mwenye atachukua juu tukienda huko tunapata na bei kali.
But at a time when graft and its associates are threatening to collapse the country's future, many of Kenyans feel that most of the money set aside in the budget is stolen through corruption.
Kulingana na jinsi mambo yalivyo katika Kenya, pesa mingi zinaenda kwa NOS na ifanyi kazi. Na tuna vijana wengi hapa nje ambao hawana kazi. Kwa hivyo ni vizuri kama ile pesa inaweza gawanywa. Hata wale vijana wako hapa nje wapate angalau pesa ya kujimundu kimaisha, waweke biashara ndogo ndogo. Maana ile mangaiko mingi iko kwa vijana hapa ni kwa maana hawana ajira yoyote.
And 60% of this money would have been allocated to youths so that it helps in enhancing job opportunities, in building industry, which would have helped our nation. And these people who are squandering these funds, I think they should be persecuted.
With rent to pay and children to school and stomachs to feed and, well, corruption to finance, millions of Kenyans will continue to live under $1 a day. Brian Obuya, KTN News.
Interesting piece there by Brian Obuya. Now, getting employment for the youth is one of the key goals of the government, and Treasury Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich says all efforts are being put in place to ensure that the youth in the country get jobs. Let's listen to part of his speech from yesterday.
It is for this reason that His Excellency the President has directed us to focus on 4 key strategic areas under the Big Four plan that will help create jobs and transform the lives of Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, achieving this strategic objective will require that all of us will pull in the same direction. In this context, that His Excellency the President has urged us to put our differences aside, build bridges, and focus on serving our people for a better Kenya. This is a profound and timely call consistent with the unifying vision of our forefathers. This has rekindled our sense of purpose and triggered a new sense of renewal. Mr. Speaker, consistent with this vision, the budget we present today is an opportunity to begin to walk this talk, and more importantly, to boldly confront the challenges we face today of getting employment for our youth, improving the lives of our people, and sharing the benefits of our economic progress. Accordingly, the theme of this year's budget is creating jobs, transforming lives, and sharing prosperity. Mr. Speaker, building a united nation is in which every Kenyan has a decent living, access to economic opportunities, and a chance to pursue their dreams is the pressing challenge facing us as a nation, and one that the budget must speak to. All of us, therefore, must heed the President's call to boldly address the underlying challenges and work hard together in order to achieve our national aspiration. Mr. Speaker, we must now seize the opportunity to accelerate our economic growth, create jobs for our youth, reduce poverty, and share our prosperity. This is because we have a government and a president who is fully committed to this resolve. We have a favorable global economic and trading environment. Our domestic economic outlook is bright. We have a fiscal plan that supports growth, provides funds for our devolved government while ensuring our debt remains sustainable.
All right, that is what Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich said yesterday while he was officially tabling the budget for the financial year 2018-2019 at the National Assembly, and especially when it comes to youth and empowerment. And that forms the basis of our conversation at this particular hour. Joining me in studio now is Bernard Onyango. He's a knowledge translation scientist at the African Institute for Development Policy, AFIDEP. Thank you very much, Bernard, for making time for us here on KTN News. Just listening to the Cabinet Secretary and just looking at this particular budget, do you think it's pro-youth?
I think the budget, whichever budget the Kenya government has today, has to be pro-youth. The reason being that if you look at the composition of our population today, at least we know that up to 75% of the population today is under the age of 35. And if you look at between age 15 and age 35, it's probably about 30-something%. So obviously, any government, any right-thinking government have to think about this really large population. And therefore, if you look at the budgetary provisions, some of the big ticket giveaway, the big ticket for infants, on education, on health, and you find that largely most of the money that is going to go into public services, education, health, should benefit young people and children who are tomorrow's youth. So yes, I think that in that sense we cannot say it's not. The budget is not targeted towards the youth. I think what's more important, though, is that can we really clearly identify the impact of the money that is, targeted towards the youth? What's the impact you're getting out of it? I think probably over the last many years, people think the impact is not as beneficial. Increasingly more money is targeted towards the youth, but the impact is not being felt. Partly because that segment of the population is growing very rapidly. But as you are seeing in the segment just before this, even the youth themselves feel like they're not benefiting. Some of them are saying, give us 60% of the budget. And it would make sense. I mean, they're the biggest group within the largest population.
Shareholders.
Exactly. So there are issues around unemployment. I think if you're following a couple, maybe 1 or 2 months ago, when they released the latest Kenya integrated budget household survey, the Kenyans were sort of upset with the evidence that was put out there saying that, unemployment rate was under 10%. While everybody, our politicians, the daily discourse that unemployment is very high. And I think what people need to realize, and maybe we don't do a very good job at times in presenting evidence, is when we say it's under 10%, when you start looking at it by the different age groups, you find, for instance, the youth between age 15 and 24, their unemployment rate is more than double the national average, and it's even higher than that for almost triple for our female youth, which is very serious. The other thing is that when we talk about unemployment, we are not factoring in, at least in this report, you're not really talking about the underemployment. In a poor country, or in a country in our situation, I think what's important to note is that given that we don't have very strong social support systems by the government, social protection programs, people will have to go out there to do something.
Yeah. Yes.
That's why you see all these hawkers, everybody's trying something. You go to the rural areas, everybody does a little bit of some subsistence agriculture. But the question about this is, does this translate into a decent living, which the cabinet secretary was talking about?
Yes.
So if you look at that report, actually, the underemployment rates are much, much higher than unemployment rate. So if you put the unemployment and the underemployment rate together, then it's pretty huge. But I think the government have its heart in the right place. Thinking about the budget itself, I think one thing that stands out for me was the increase in the budget for the TVET sector, which have more than doubled. I think it's gone up to 16 billion.
Yes.
And that's a good thing, because one of the things is that we are in a place where even for the skills, we need to, you know, when we see buildings collapsing in Nairobi, we do have people, you know, the Mjengo people, but do they have the right skills to actually make sure that, you know, when you hire them and they put up these structures, that we are getting the proper standards? And therefore, I think the TVET, the TVET sector have a big role to play, not only in skilling young people who are still within the formal school system, but the millions of young people who are already out of the school, out of the school system. And we need to really get them back into some form of training, get them the right skills, and see where that takes us.
Okay, we know that your organization is set to release research findings, especially based on young people across the region. Just talk to us about some of the findings that you were able to talk about before the official launch. And what did you find out about young people, and how can governments prioritize based on some of the findings you got?
Yeah, so we are on Wednesday, we are going to do the Kenyan launch of, we're calling the Regional Analysis of Youth Demographics. And this was a study that AFIDEP and in partnership with the University of Southampton did over the last 1 year or so. And it covered Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Rwanda. That's looking at youth and different facets of their lives, and what are their needs, and what this means going forward. One thing, one of our findings, of course, is that we expect this segment to start with, the population as a whole is just going to grow very rapidly. I think many people don't usually project too far into the future. If you look at the population of Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, each one of these countries by between 2050 and 2060 will be hitting 100 million people. And, you know, a large proportion of these are going to be young people. So, you know, one of the things we are looking at, we are looking at the different scenarios and saying, what does this mean in terms of making sure that we have enough schools, for instance, to cater for this rapidly rising school-age population? What does it mean in terms of, I think one of the other areas where that's very important for young people is their health, and especially sexual reproductive health and services. And so what does it mean for all these large numbers of young people who will need these services in an area that has typically for many years been very contentious? I think one of the things people have really talked around, how can we help to educate young people more to understand what their sexual and reproductive health needs are, in addition to providing services. So those are some of the emerging evidence coming out of that study. But there's also the issue around urbanization. Because one of the things we did was let's look at what's the evidence out there. So we know it's a big deal, urbanization. More and more people are going to be living in our cities over the next few decades. But we don't have and I think both government, academia, you know, private, we have not really done a good job towards putting in money in finding out what are going to be the service needs, for instance, the housing. I think that if you think about the big four, if we are talking about the housing agenda, what's the evidence base for saying we need so many houses and where do we need them, and looking into the future, you know, which parts of the country will need more housing than the rest. So it's a whole, we feel like it's a whole big agenda that has to be put out there. And part of you know, the basis for this study was this idea that people are thinking about how can we turn this youth potential into something productive, into something that really helps our country, not just in Kenya, but all across sub-Saharan Africa. So we've been working around, even in the Southern Africa region, in countries such as Botswana, Namibia, where the proportion of the youth is actually much larger than here. And you find that unemployment rates for youth in those countries are as high as 50%. And for them, they're thinking, okay, what do we need to do to make sure that when these kids get out of school, when young people get out of school, they have jobs? How can they get, because for instance in Botswana we're looking and we're seeing young people are staying, their dependents up to even age 30, okay? And I think increasingly it's happening in urban Kenya especially. You see a lot more young people are unable to strike out on their own and live on their own even after college, so they still stay with their parents. While we are doing our planning, we look at a theoretical age of dependency, maybe up to age 15. In reality, you find that
it's up to 30.
Up to age 30, which is, you know, it just means that there are many more mouths to feed, many more needs for the few people who are actually.
So what's the missing link? Each government seems to look like it's making huge strides or efforts to try and cushion this, but the rates continue to be the same. What are we not getting right?
And this is really, you know, something that my organization is very passionate about. I think we really need to make decisions based on evidence. Over the last, and even going back to the Kibaki presidency, when you had the Kazi kwa Vijana, and then we pumped in money into NYF, we have all this youth fund, you know, women fund. Are we really doing, number one, are we doing proper evaluation on impact? Because we shouldn't just be putting in more money and we are not sure about what kind of impact we are getting out of this program. I think it hasn't been done very well. There have been some efforts to do it, but not very well. I think we need to when we want to invest in programs, we have to pilot programs. Pilot it, see what works, also pick on best practices from other places. And then in the case of Kenya, there is also this, we really have to navigate the national government and the county government. If you look at the budget again, going back to the budget, you look at what we have for agriculture and probably you feel like this will not really make the kind of impact we want. Meanwhile, we know that up to 60% plus of the Kenyan population is supported by this, the agriculture sector. So how does the national government and the county government work and make sure that, and how do Kenyans make sure that county governments actually invest in agriculture, which is, you know, the main sector that people living in rural areas depend on. So it's really building that evidence base.
Definitely a challenge as well for the county governments.
Yes.
Thank you very much for coming here and just helping us understand the demographics, the youth demographics, and what really it would mean to put in money and ensure that it is effective at the end of the day. Bernard Onyango is the Knowledge Translation Scientist at the African Institute of Development Policy, joining us in the studio now. We are still on the post-budget talk and just looking at various groups of people and what this financial year's budget would mean, especially in this particular discussion, the youth of this country. And I want us now to take a quick break. We still have a lot more Landa for you here on KTN News Desk. Don't go too far.